They took his land, killed his friend, so he became the law. The scorching Arizona sun painted the sky orange as Mason Kane guided his wagon along the dusty trail leading to Willow Creek. Beside him, Sarah, his wife with hair like golden wheat, gently cradled little Emma, only 6 years old. The child slept peacefully, oblivious to the desert's suffocating heat. "Pa, when we gonna get there?" asked Thomas, the 10-year-old boy, stretching in the wagon bed among grain sacks and tools. "Soon, son. See that ridge?" "Our ranch is just beyond it," Mason replied, adjusting the worn leather hat that shielded his blue eyes from the merciless sun. Mason Kane wasn't a man of violence. At 35, all he wanted was to work his land, raise his children, and grow old beside Sarah. His calloused hands knew the handle of a hoe better than that of a gun, though he could shoot, a necessary skill for any man in these wild lands. The Kane Ranch was modest, but thriving. 50 head of cattle, a well of crystal-clear water, and soil fertile enough to grow corn and beans. Mason had built every fence, every corral with his own hands, transforming the arid terrain into a home. "You're quiet today," Sarah observed, gently touching her husband's arm. "Just thinking about how blessed we are." Mason smiled, kissing his wife's forehead. 10 years ago, I had nothing but an old horse and dreams. Now, look at us." Sarah returned the smile, but something in her green eyes showed concern. "Mason, about Colonel Blackwood's offer." "I already said no, Sarah. This land ain't for sale. Not to him, not to anybody." Mason's jaw tightened slightly. Colonel Blackwood had been pressuring local ranchers to sell, building what folks whispered would be a cattle empire. But Mason had refused every offer, no matter how generous. The wagon crested the final hill, and their homestead came into view. The modest 2-story house stood proud against the desert backdrop, smoke rising from the chimney where their hired hand, old Pete, was likely preparing supper. "Home," Emma murmured sleepily, stirring in her mother's arms. "That's right, sweetheart. Home," Sarah whispered, but her eyes remained fixed on the horizon where dust clouds gathered ominously. Mason noticed his wife's gaze. Just travelers, most likely, or cowboys heading to town. But even as he spoke the reassuring words, his free hand instinctively moved closer to the Winchester rifle tucked beside the wagon seat. In the Arizona Territory, a man learned to trust his instincts, and something about those dust clouds made the hair on his neck stand up. As they pulled into the ranch, old Pete emerged from the barn, his weathered face creased with worry. "Mr. Kane, glad you're back. Had some visitors while you were gone." Visitors?" Mason helped Sarah down from the wagon, his voice carefully neutral. "Blackwood's men said they'd be back to talk to you personal-like. Didn't much care for their tone, if you ask me." Mason's peaceful expression hardened slightly. "How many?" "4 riders. That mean-looking foreman of his, Jake Thornton, was leading them." Sarah clutched Emma tighter. Everyone knew Thornton's reputation, a former Confederate raider who'd found new purpose in Blackwood's employ, enforcing the colonel's will with brutal efficiency. "Take the children inside," Mason told his wife quietly. "Pete, help me with the supplies." As Sarah ushered the children toward the house, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that his peaceful life was standing on the edge of a cliff. He'd built this ranch with honest sweat and determination, and he'd be damned if he'd let anyone take it from him. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch. Mason Kane had no way of knowing it would be the last peaceful sunset he'd ever witness. 3 days passed in deceptive tranquility. Mason worked his fields, Sarah tended her garden, and the children played in the dusty yard under the watchful eye of old Pete. But the peace was a fragile thing. Like morning frost in the desert, it shattered on a Tuesday evening. Mason was in the barn, tending to a mare with a split hoof, when he heard the thunder of approaching hooves. Through the barn door, he counted 8 riders, dark silhouettes against the dying light. Jake Thornton rode at the front, his scarred face partially hidden beneath a black hat. "Kane!" Thornton's voice was like gravel scraping metal. "Colonel wants a word." Mason stepped out of the barn, pitchfork still in hand. "Colonels welcome to visit during civilized hours. Sun's setting, Thornton. Time for you boys to head home." Thornton spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Funny thing about time, Kane. It's running out for you." The other riders spread out in a semicircle, hands resting on their gun butts. Mason noticed Sarah watching from the kitchen window, her face pale. He prayed she'd keep the children inside. "I told Blackwood my answer. The ranch ain't for sale." "See, that's where you're wrong." Thornton dismounted, spurs jangling ominously. "Everything's for sale. Just depends on the currency. Colonel's offering gold." He drew his revolver, examining it casually. "Or lead. Your choice. You threatening me on my own land." Mason's grip tightened on the pitchfork. "Threatening?" Thornton laughed, a sound like rattlesnakes. "Nah, just explaining reality. This whole valley's gonna be Blackwood land. You can take his money and start fresh somewhere else, or—" He aimed the revolver at the house. Things could get unpleasant. The barn door creaked. Old Pete emerged, shotgun in hand. "Mr. Kane ain't alone, Thornton." "Pete, get back inside," Mason warned. But the old man stood firm. "Been with this family 8 years, ain't running now." Thornton's smile widened. "Touching, really, but mathematics ain't in your favor. 2 of you, 8 of us." "9," a new voice corrected. Colonel Blackwood himself rode into view, dressed in an immaculate black suit despite the dust. He was a man in his 50s, with silver hair and cold grey eyes that had seen fortunes built on others' misfortunes. "Good evening, Mr. Kane." "Colonel," Mason acknowledged stiffly. "I'm disappointed, Kane. I've made you a more than fair offer. 3 times what this land is worth. It's worth more than money to me." Blackwood sighed theatrically. "I suspected as much. You're an idealist, Kane. Admirable in its way, but idealism is a luxury the territory can't afford. Progress demands sacrifice." "Your progress, you mean? Your empire?" "The future, Mr. Kane. Cattle from here to the Colorado River. Jobs for hundreds. Prosperity for the territory." Blackwood's eyes glinted, all held back by one stubborn rancher who can't see beyond his own fence posts. "My family's been nothing but good neighbors. We don't bother nobody." "No, you don't. But you're in the way." Blackwood nodded to Thornton. "Show Mr. Kane what happens to obstacles." Before Mason could react, Thornton's gun swung toward old Pete. The shot cracked like thunder. Pete staggered, red blooming across his chest, and collapsed into the dust. "Pete!" Mason started forward, but found himself staring down 8 gun barrels. "That's 1, Blackwood said calmly. "Would you like to see 2? The house door burst open. Sarah ran out, Thomas trying to hold her back. "You murdered him. You murdered him in cold blood." "Sarah, get back inside," Mason shouted, but she kept coming, tears streaming down her face. "Ma'am," Blackwood tipped his hat mockingly, "my condolences. Perhaps this tragedy could have been avoided if your husband were more reasonable." "You're a monster," Sarah spat. Blackwood's expression darkened. "I'm a businessman, Mrs. Kane, and your husband is bad for business." "Papa," Emma's small voice called from the doorway. The little girl stood there in her nightgown, clutching a rag doll. "Emma, go back inside, sweetheart." Mason's voice cracked with desperation. Thornton holstered his gun and pulled out a document. "Sign it, Kane. Sign it now. Take your family and leave tonight, or things get worse." Mason looked at Pete's still form, at his terrified family, at the guns pointed at everything he loved. His shoulders sagged. "Give me the paper." "Mason, no!" Sarah protested. "We have no choice," he said quietly, taking the document. His hand shook as he signed away 10 years of dreams. Blackwood smiled triumphantly. "Wise decision. You have 1 hour to pack what you can carry. My men will escort you to the edge of the territory. What about Pete? He deserves a proper burial." "The coyotes will handle that," Thornton sneered. As the riders began to withdraw, Blackwood paused. "Oh, and Kane! Don't even think about going to the law. Sheriff Watson and I have an understanding. This was a legal eviction of squatters who turned violent. Poor Pete drew first. 8 witnesses will swear to it." Mason's fists clenched, but he stayed silent. Sarah gathered the children, both now crying, and ushered them inside. "1 hour, Kane," Blackwood called as he rode away. "Don't test me." Mason knelt beside Pete's body. The old man's eyes stared sightlessly at the stars beginning to appear. "I'm sorry, friend. I'm so sorry." He had 1 hour to pack up his life, to explain to his children why they had to leave their home, to comfort his traumatized wife. 1 hour before, he became another casualty of Blackwood's ambition. But as Mason gently closed Pete's eyes, something else closed inside him. The peaceful rancher began to die, replaced by something harder, colder. He didn't know it yet, but Jake Thornton had just made the worst mistake of his life. He'd left Mason Kane alive. The Kane family wagon rolled through the desert darkness, escorted by 4 of Blackwood's men. Emma slept fitfully against her mother's shoulder while Thomas sat rigid, his young face etched with shock and anger. Mason drove in silence, his knuckles white on the reins. They'd barely had time to grab clothing, family photos, and Sarah's mother's Bible. Everything else, furniture, tools, 10 years of memories, remained behind. Mason had wrapped Pete's body in a blanket and hidden it in the root cellar, promising himself he'd return to give his friend a proper burial. "That's far enough," one of the riders announced as they reached Skeleton Ridge, the unofficial boundary of the territory. "Colonel's generosity ends here." The lead rider, a man named Briggs, tossed a small leather pouch into the wagon. $50. Colonel figured you'd need traveling money. Consider it charity. "We don't want his blood money," Sarah said coldly. Briggs shrugged. "Suit yourself, but I'd take it. Long way to anywhere from here, and that's a lot of desert for young ones." Mason picked up the pouch, weighing it in his hand. Then he looked Briggs in the eye. "Tell Blackwood something for me." "Yeah? Tell him I'll be seeing him." Briggs laughed. "Sure, Kane. Whatever helps you sleep." The riders wheeled their horses around and galloped back toward Willow Creek, leaving the family alone in the vast darkness. "Mason, what are we going to do?" Sarah's voice was small, defeated. "We're going to Tucson. My brother has a store there. He'll help us get back on our feet." And then? Mason didn't answer. He couldn't tell her about the dark thoughts taking root in his mind, the images of Thornton's sneering face, of Pete falling into the dust. He snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward into the unknown. They traveled through the night, stopping only to water the horses at a small spring. As dawn broke, Emma woke with a fever. "Mama, I don't feel good," she whimpered. Sarah felt her forehead and gasped. "She's burning up, Mason. We need to find a doctor." "Nearest town is Coyote Wells, about 10 miles south." Mason urged the horses faster, fear adding urgency to their flight. By the time they reached the ramshackle collection of buildings that passed for Coyote Wells, Emma was delirious. The town doctor, a drunk named Hollis, examined her with shaking hands. "Desert fever," he pronounced. "Seen it before. Stress and exhaustion bring it on sometimes. She needs rest, lots of water, and this." He handed Sarah a bottle of foul-smelling tonic. "That'll be $5. Mason paid without complaint. They rented a room at the town's only boarding house, and Sarah tended to Emma while Mason took Thomas to buy supplies. "Pa, why didn't we fight?" Thomas asked as they walked down the dusty street. "We could have..." "Could have what, son? Gotten ourselves killed? Left your ma and sister alone?" Mason put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Sometimes the brave thing is knowing when not to fight." "But they killed Pete." "I know." Mason's voice was granite. "And that's a debt that will be paid. But not yet. Not until you and Emma and your mother are safe." They spent 3 days in Coyote Wells while Emma recovered. During that time, Mason learned things. He learned that Blackwood had done this before, forcing out small ranchers through intimidation and violence. He learned that Sheriff Watson was indeed in Blackwood's pocket, along with the territorial judge. He learned that Jake Thornton had killed at least 12 men and never faced justice. He also learned other things. In the saloon, he met a former cavalry scout named Samuel Rivers, a half Apache who'd been run off his land by Blackwood 2 years prior. Rivers taught him how to track men across the desert, how to move without sound, how to shoot not just accurately, but quickly. "Why are you helping me?" Mason asked one evening as they practiced in the desert outside town. "Because I see it in your eyes," Rivers replied. "The same thing I saw in my own mirror. You're going back, aren't you? My family needs me." "No, they need the man you were, the man you're becoming. He's got different needs." Rivers handed him a peculiar knife, its blade black as midnight. "Apache steel, it'll cut through anything, silent as death. When you go back, and we both know you will, remember, revenge is like a wildfire. It consumes everything in its path, including the one who lights it." On the 4th day, Emma was well enough to travel. Mason loaded his family back into the wagon, but something fundamental had changed. Sarah noticed it in the way he checked the new rifle he'd bought, in the cold calculation that had replaced warmth in his eyes. "Mason, you're scaring me," she said as they prepared to leave for Tucson. "I'm going to get you and the children settled at Robert's place. Then I have business to attend to." "What kind of business?" He looked at her then, and Sarah saw a stranger wearing her husband's face. "The kind that ends with justice. Justice or revenge. In this case, they're the same thing." "And what about us? What about your family?" "Everything I'm going to do is for my family, to make sure no one ever forces us from our home again, to make sure Pete's death means something. Pete wouldn't want this. He wouldn't want you to become like them." Mason climbed onto the wagon seat. "Pete doesn't want anything anymore. They saw to that." As they rolled out of Coyote Wells, Thomas looked back at his father. "Pa, that man Rivers, he was teaching you to kill folks, wasn't he?" Mason met his son's eyes in the mirror. "He was teaching me to survive, son. In this territory, sometimes they're the same thing." The wagon rolled on toward Tucson, but Mason Kane was already gone. In his place sat something else, something forged in the fires of loss and injustice. The peaceful rancher had died the moment Pete hit the ground. What remained was patience, planning, and a terrible purpose. Blackwood and his men had made a fatal error. They'd created the very thing that would destroy them, a man with nothing left to lose but his need for vengeance. 6 months later, Jake Thornton stood at the bar of the Silver Dollar Saloon in Willow Creek, whiskey burning his throat. The saloon was crowded with Blackwood's men, celebrating another successful acquisition. The Martinez family had fled their ranch that morning after their barn mysteriously caught fire. "To progress!" Thornton raised his glass, and the men cheered. He never saw the shadow in the doorway, never heard the footsteps approaching through the noise and laughter. The first indication of trouble was when the saloon suddenly went quiet, conversations dying like flames doused with water. Mason Kane stood in the entrance, but this wasn't the farmer Thornton remembered. 6 months in the desert had transformed him. His face was leaner, harder, burnt dark by the sun. He wore black from head to toe, 2 Colt .45s on his hips, and Rivers' Apache knife sheathed at his back, but it was his eyes that made men step aside, cold as winter stars, empty of everything but purpose. "Well, well," Thornton set down his glass, hand drifting to his gun. "Mason Kane, heard you were in Tucson, playing shopkeeper with your brother." "You heard wrong." Mason's voice was quiet, carrying despite the silence. "Come back for your ranch?" "Too late. Colonel's already got cattle grazing where your house used to stand." "I came back for you, Thornton." The gunman laughed, but it sounded forced. "Me? I'm touched, Kane, really. But you're outnumbered 8-1 again." "Count again." Thornton looked around. Several of his men were missing. "Where's Briggs? Morrison?" "Briggs is feeding the buzzards about 3 miles north. Morrison's in an arroyo to the east. Watson and Cole won't be coming either." Mason stepped further into the saloon. "That leaves 4. Harris there has a wife and young daughter. Doubt he wants to orphan them. The Martinez brothers are only here for the money, not worth dying for another man's fight. That leaves you and Daniels." Daniels, a young gun hand barely out of his teens, was already backing toward the rear door. "I didn't sign up for this, Jake." "Sit down, boy," Thornton snarled. But Daniels was gone, the door swinging behind him. "Smart kid," Mason observed. "Now it's just you and me, the way it should have been from the start. You murdered 4 men. I executed 4 murderers, men who helped steal my land and killed my friend." Mason's hand hovered over his right Colt. "You remember Pete, don't you? Old man who never hurt anybody? You shot him down like a dog. He pulled a shotgun after you threatened my family." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "My 6-year-old daughter had nightmares for months. My wife jumps at every sound. My boy asks me why good men die while evil ones prosper. What should I tell him, Thornton? Tell him his father's a fool who's about to join his friend in hell." Thornton was fast. In his years of violence, few men had matched his speed. His hand blurred toward his gun, clearing leather in a heartbeat. Mason was faster. The Colt appeared in his hand as if by magic, roaring once. Thornton's gun flew from nerveless fingers as Mason's bullet shattered his wrist. The gunman screamed, clutching his ruined hand. "That's for making my daughter cry," Mason said calmly. He fired again, the bullet taking Thornton's left knee. The man collapsed, howling. "That's for my wife's tears. Kill me and Blackwood will hunt you down." Thornton gasped through the pain. "I'm counting on it." Mason walked closer, standing over the writhing gunman. "But first you're going to give him a message." "Go to hell!" Mason's boot came down on Thornton's shattered wrist, grinding the bones. The scream that followed made hardened men wince. "The message, Thornton. Tell Blackwood that Mason Kane is coming. Tell him I'm going to take everything from him piece by piece. His men, his empire, his life. Tell him he created me the night he had you murder Pete. He'll destroy you. He already did." Mason drew his second Colt. "But I got better. You won't." The third shot took Thornton in the stomach, a wound that would kill slowly and painfully. Mason holstered his weapons and turned to the remaining men in the saloon. "Anyone here still drawing Blackwood's pay has 2 choices. Leave the territory tonight, or end up like Thornton. Spread the word." He walked out into the night, leaving Thornton bleeding on the sawdust floor. Behind him, men scrambled for the exits, suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. By dawn, Jake Thornton was dead, and half of Blackwood's hired guns had fled Willow Creek. The war had begun, and Mason Kane had drawn first blood. In his mansion on the hill, Colonel Blackwood stood at his window, watching the sun rise over his empire. His foreman knocked and entered. "Sir, Thornton's dead. Kane killed him. Briggs, Morrison, Watson, and Cole, too. The men are spooked. Half of them lit out during the night." Blackwood sipped his imported coffee. "Double the pay for those who stay. Triple for whoever brings me Kane's head. Sir, maybe we should consider..." "Consider what? Negotiating with a murderer?" Blackwood's eyes were cold. "I've built too much to let one man tear it down. Wire Fort Huachuca. Tell them I need to hire some of their Indian scouts, the best trackers money can buy." "Yes, sir. What about your family? Should we post extra guards?" "I have no family, Henderson. That's what makes me strong. Kane has a wife and children in Tucson. Find them." Henderson shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, going after women and children..." Did I stutter? Blackwood turned from the window. "This is war, Henderson. In war, you target what your enemy values most. Find the Kane family. When we have them, Mason Kane will come to us." As Henderson left to carry out his orders, Blackwood returned to his window. Somewhere out there, a ghost from his past was stalking his present. But ghosts could be laid to rest, and Mason Kane would learn what happened to men who challenged the Colonel's authority. The game had begun, and Blackwood intended to win. He always did. Mason crouched in the shadows of the canyon, watching Blackwood's mansion through field glasses. 2 weeks had passed since Thornton's death, and the Colonel had turned his estate into a fortress. Guards patrolled in pairs, Apache scouts watched the perimeter, and every approach was covered by riflemen. 42 men, a voice said beside him. Samuel Rivers materialized from the rocks like a ghost, plus 6 Apache trackers from Fort Huachuca. "You stirred up a hornet's nest, my friend. Any word from Tucson? Your family is safe." Your brother moved them to his wife's people in California. Blackwood's men searched Tucson for 3 days, but found empty rooms. Relief washed over Mason. Good. That's one less thing to worry about. Is it? Rivers studied him. When did you last write to them? Your boy must be wondering why his father hasn't come for them. When this is over, you'll be dead or wanted in every territory west of the Mississippi. Rivers spat tobacco juice. This path you're on, it doesn't lead to happy reunions. I know what it leads to. Mason lowered the field glasses. Justice. That what you're calling it? Rivers shook his head. I've walked this trail, Mason. Killed the men who took my land. Know what I got for it? Empty satisfaction and a lifetime of looking over my shoulder. Then why are you helping me? Because a man needs to finish what he starts, even if it damns him. Rivers pointed to the mansion. But Blackwood's no fool. He knows you're coming. Every night he sleeps in a different room. Food tasters check his meals. He never travels the same route twice. Every fortress has a weakness. Maybe, but finding it might cost more than you're willing to pay. Rivers pulled out a folded paper. This came through the Apache telegraph. Thought you should see it. Mason unfolded the wanted poster. His own face stared back at him above the words. Wanted dead or alive. Mason Kane. 5,000 reward. Murder of territorial deputies. Deputies, Mason said bitterly. They're calling Thornton and his killers deputies now. Money like that will bring every bounty hunter in the territory. You can't fight them all. I don't need to fight them all. Just Blackwood. A whistle echoed through the canyon. Rivers' warning signal. Both men melted into the rocks as horses approached. 3 riders appeared on the trail below, and Mason recognized the lead man. Tom Garrett, Blackwood's new enforcer, brought in from Texas to replace Thornton. Told him Kane's just one man, Garrett was saying. All this security for a single farmer gone bad. Farmer who killed 5 men in one night, another rider pointed out. Lucky shots. When I find him, we'll see how lucky he is against someone who knows the business end of a gun. The riders passed and Mason made a decision. Rivers, I need you to do something for me. Name it. There's a woman in Willow Creek, Maria Santos. She runs the boarding house. Blackwood's men killed her husband last year when he wouldn't sell his freight business. She might be willing to help. Might be willing to die, you mean? I'm not asking her to fight, just to listen and pass along what she hears. Blackwood's men drink at her place. They talk. Rivers considered. I'll approach her. Carefully. What else? The Apache Scouts. Can you reach out to them? They're mercenaries, not loyal to Blackwood. Maybe they can be persuaded to look the other way at the right moment. Money talks in any language. I've got Thornton's gold. Blood money, but it'll spend. As darkness fell, they made their way back to Mason's camp, hidden deep in a box canyon. It wasn't much. A lean-to shelter, cached supplies, and a string of stolen horses. But it was invisible from above and defensible from below. You know Blackwood's trying to draw you out, Rivers said as they shared a meal of jerky and hardtack. All this security isn't to keep you away. It's to make you desperate, careless. Let him think I'm getting desperate. Meanwhile, I'll keep picking off his men, one by one. Morrison's crew is moving cattle through Devil's Pass tomorrow. 3 men, maybe 4. You can't win a war of attrition. He can hire more men faster than you can kill them. I don't need to kill them all. Just enough to make the rest think twice. Fear is contagious, Rivers. When men start jumping at shadows, seeing me behind every rock, Blackwood's money won't be enough to keep them. Rivers was quiet for a moment. There's something else. Word is, Blackwood's brought in a specialist from back east, a Pinkerton man named Crawford, expert at hunting men who don't want to be found. Good. I'm tired of hunting. Let them come to me for a change. You're not invincible, Mason. One mistake, one moment of bad luck, and Sarah becomes a widow for real. Mason stared into the fire. Sarah became a widow the night Blackwood took our home. She just doesn't know it yet. The man she married, the father of her children, he's gone. What's left is just his ghost, looking for a grave. Ghosts can't pull triggers. This one can. Mason checked his weapons methodically. and will, until Blackwood joins me in whatever hell waits for men like us." The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the canyon walls. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that seemed to echo Mason's soul. "I'll reach out to the Santos woman," Rivers said finally, "and the Apache scouts. But Mason, when this is over, if you survive, what then?" Mason looked up at the stars, the same stars that had watched over his ranch, his family, his former life. "There is no after, Samuel. There's only the job at hand. And when it's done," he shrugged, "maybe I'll finally get some sleep." Rivers said nothing more, but in his eyes was the recognition of a man who'd walked this path before. They both knew how it ended. The only question was, how many would fall before Mason Kane found his rest? In Willow Creek, Maria Santos closed her boarding house for the night and knelt beside her bed. She prayed for her dead husband, for her children's safety, and for deliverance from the evil that had taken root in their town. She didn't know it yet, but her prayers were about to be answered by a devil of a different kind. The Pinkerton detective Crawford was good at his job. In 3 weeks, he'd mapped Mason's movement patterns, identified 2 of his supply caches, and nearly trapped him twice. But nearly wasn't enough, and Blackwood's patience was wearing thin. Mason watched from a ridge as Crawford examined tracks near a waterhole. The detective was a small, neat man who looked more like a bank clerk than a manhunter. But his mild appearance hid a sharp mind and an absolute lack of conscience. "He's pushing you north," Rivers observed, "away from Willow Creek into the Badlands." "I know." Mason studied the terrain. But Maria sent word. "Blackwood's leaving his fortress tomorrow. Business in Prescott. He'll have guards, but he'll be exposed. It's a trap. Has to be. Everything's a trap now. Question is, who's the hunter and who's the prey?" That night, Mason met Maria Santos in the ruins of an old mission outside town. She was a handsome woman in her 40s, with steel in her spine and revolution in her eyes. 20 guards, she reported, plus Crawford and Tom Garrett. They'll take the main road through Skeleton Pass. "When?" "Dawn. Blackwood wants to reach Prescott by nightfall." She handed him a paper. "Guard positions, weapons, everything I could learn. You've risked enough, Maria. After tomorrow, disappear for a while. After tomorrow, we'll either be free or dead. Either way, I'm done hiding." She touched his arm. "My husband believed in justice, Mr. Kane. So do I. Make them pay." Mason rode through the night, reaching Skeleton Pass as the eastern sky began to lighten. The pass was a natural ambush point. High walls, limited visibility, nowhere to run. Which is exactly why Blackwood wouldn't be there. "You're learning," Mason murmured, spotting fresh wagon tracks leading away from the main road. A decoy would travel through the pass, while Blackwood took the longer but safer route through the flatlands. But Mason had learned too. He'd learned patience from the Apache, deception from Crawford's own tactics, and ruthlessness from Blackwood himself. He'd prepared for this moment. The explosion echoed across the desert like thunder. Mason had spent 2 days placing dynamite charges along the flatland route, turning a mile of road into a death trap. From his vantage point, he watched Blackwood's convoy stumble into chaos. The lead wagon erupted in flames. Guards scattered, horses screamed, and dust clouds obscured everything. Mason descended from his position, moving through the confusion like death itself. Tom Garrett was the first to spot him. The Texas gunman was fast, clearing leather in a heartbeat. But Mason shot from the hip, 2 bullets center mass. Garrett toppled from his horse, his reign of terror ending in the dust. "Kane!" Crawford's voice cut through the chaos. The Pinkerton had taken cover behind an overturned wagon, rifle in hand. "Surrender now, and I guarantee you'll reach trial alive." Mason's response was a bullet that splintered wood inches from Crawford's head. "Only one man I want, Crawford. Stay out of my way." Guards fired from all directions, but the dust and smoke provided cover. Mason moved constantly, never staying in one spot long enough to be targeted. His guns spoke with deadly precision. Another guard down, another. Then he saw him. Colonel Blackwood crouched beside his private carriage, pistol in hand but eyes wide with something he'd never felt before: fear. "Blackwood!" Mason's voice carried over the gunfire. "Time to settle accounts!" The colonel fired wildly, his shots going wide. Mason walked toward him, bullets whining past, untouchable in his purpose. "You took everything from me," Mason said, closing the distance. "My home, my friend, my life. Business!" Blackwood gasped, fumbling to reload. "It was just business." "So is this." Crawford tried to intervene, breaking cover to get a clear shot. Rivers appeared behind him like a shadow, Apache knife flashing. The detective crumpled without a sound. "Thanks for the lessons, Crawford," Rivers said to the dying man. "Learned a lot about hunting and being hunted." Mason stood over Blackwood now. The colonel had dropped his gun, hands raised in surrender. "Please, I have money, more than you can imagine. Take it all." "Can your money bring back Pete? Can it erase my daughter's nightmares? Can it make me the man I was? I can give you back your ranch, everything. Just spare me." Mason holstered one Colt, drew the Apache knife Rivers had given him months ago. "You're going to die, Blackwood. But first you're going to understand what you did. Every family you destroyed, every life you ruined. You're going to feel it all." "No, please, The knife moved, and Blackwood screamed. It wasn't a quick death or a merciful one. Mason made sure of that. By the end, the colonel was begging for the bullet that finally came. As the sun climbed higher, the gunfire ceased. Of Blackwood's 20 guards, 6 survived, fleeing into the desert. Crawford was dead, Garrett was dead, and the colonel's empire had died with him. Mason stood among the carnage, blood on his hands and emptiness in his heart. The vengeance he'd sought for so long had been achieved, but it brought no satisfaction, no peace. "It's done," Rivers said quietly. "Yeah." Mason looked at his blood-stained hands. "It's done. What now?" "Now?" Mason laughed bitterly. "Now I disappear. Mason Kane is dead. Has been since the night they took his home. Time to bury him proper. Your family has a good man to raise them. My brother's twice the father I could be now." He pulled out a leather pouch, heavy with gold, taken from Blackwood's carriage. "See that Maria gets this. Blood money, but it'll help her start over somewhere else. And you?" Mason looked west, toward the endless desert. "Ghost towns need ghosts. Seems fitting." Rivers watched his friend mount up and ride away, knowing they'd never meet again. The Apache understood. Some men could find their way back from the darkness. Others were consumed by it, becoming one with the shadows they'd embraced. By nightfall, the story was already spreading. The Willow Creek Massacre, they'd call it. The day one man's quest for vengeance painted the desert red. Some would call Mason Kane a hero, others a monster. Both were right, but Mason himself was already gone, riding into the setting sun, carrying his ghosts and his guilt into the wilderness. Behind him, Willow Creek began to breathe again, free from Blackwood's tyranny. Families returned to their lands, Maria Santos rebuilt her life, and slowly, peace returned to the valley. It was a peace paid for in blood, purchased by a good man who'd become a killer to protect what he loved. The price of that transformation was exile, self-imposed, but absolute. 6 months after Blackwood's death, the Arizona Territory had moved on. New ranchers claimed the divided empire, Willow Creek prospered under honest leadership, and the name Mason Kane had become legend, a cautionary tale told in saloons and around campfires. But legends have a way of refusing to die. In the mining town of Copper Ridge, 3 men sat in a cantina planning their next move. They were the last of Blackwood's inner circle, men who'd escaped the massacre and regrouped, driven by greed and revenge. "The colonel had gold hidden," Marcus Webb was saying. "Lots of it, buried somewhere on the old Kane property. So we dig it up and disappear," agreed Santos, a knife-scarred killer who'd once been Blackwood's personal bodyguard. The third man, a half-breed tracker named Chavez, shook his head. "You're forgetting something. Kane's still out there." "Kane's gone," Webb insisted. "No one's seen him in months. Probably in Mexico by now, or dead in the desert. Men like Cain don't run to Mexico, Chavez said quietly, and they're hard to kill. Even if he's alive, he's just one man, Santos sneered. We've got a dozen guns now, good men who aren't afraid of shadows. Blackwood had 20. How'd that work out? Webb slammed his fist on the table. Enough! We ride at dawn. Get the gold and get out. Cain shows up, we put him down like the dog he is. In the corner of the cantina, a figure in a worn serape lifted his head slightly. The face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but the eyes that watched the three men were cold and familiar. Mason Cain had never left. He'd been waiting, watching, knowing that Blackwood's death wouldn't end it. Evil men always had successors, and greed always brought them back. That night, Webb woke to find a knife pinning a note to his pillow, inches from his throat. The message was simple. Last chance. Leave the territory. By morning, half the hired guns had vanished, spooked by similar warnings. But Webb, Santos and Chavez pushed on, driven by visions of buried gold. They reached the ruins of the Cain Ranch as the sun peaked. The house Mason had built with his own hands was gone, burned to the foundation. The barn where Pete had died stood empty and accusing. Nature was already reclaiming the land, erasing the scars of human ambition. Spread out, Webb ordered. The gold's here somewhere. Check the well, the root cellar, anywhere Blackwood might have hidden it. They searched for hours, finding nothing but memories and ghosts. As frustration mounted, Santos kicked at the ruins of the house. Maybe there never was any gold. Maybe it's just another story. No, Webb insisted. I saw the ledgers. Blackwood skimmed from every deal, every extortion. It's here. Looking for this. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The men spun, guns drawn, but saw only empty land. Cain, Webb shouted. Show yourself. You're standing on it, the voice continued. The gold, buried right under the house, under the room where my daughter used to sleep, where my wife and I dreamed of growing old together. Then we'll dig it up, Santos snarled, and if you try to stop us... A shot rang out. Santos's gun flew from his hand, his wrist shattered. He screamed, falling to his knees. That's one. Mason's voice was calm, almost conversational. Pete always said I was too soft, too willing to give men second chances. He was right. Chavez, the tracker, had gone very still. His eyes scanned the terrain with professional appreciation. Webb, we need to go, now. Not without the gold. Another shot. Webb's hat flew off, a neat hole through the crown. That's two. Won't be a third warning. You can't murder us. Webb was backing toward the horses now, bravado crumbling. There are laws. Were there laws when Blackwood murdered Pete? When you burned out the Martinez family? When you destroyed everything good in this valley for profit? Mason finally showed himself, rising from a concealed position like a spectre. He looked older, harder, worn down to essential elements. I am the law now. The only justice men like you understand. Santos, clutching his ruined wrist, made a desperate play. With his good hand, he pulled a hidden derringer. Mason's Colt roared twice. Santos tumbled backward, his blood soaking into the earth where the Cain kitchen once stood. Santos! Webb started forward, then stopped as Mason's gun swung toward him. Take him and go, Mason said quietly. Tell everyone what happened here. Tell them the gold is cursed, paid for in blood. Anyone who comes looking for it will find only death. You're insane, Webb whispered. Yes, Mason agreed. Your kind made me that way. Now go, before I decide you've lived too long. Webb and Chavez loaded Santos's body onto a horse and fled. As their dust settled, Mason walked to the ruins of his home. He knelt where his bedroom had been, where he and Sarah had whispered dreams in the darkness. Rivers appeared beside him, as silent as always. How long you going to keep doing this? Until they stop coming, or until one of them gets lucky. That's no life, Mason. I'm not alive, Samuel. Haven't been since that night. I'm just unfinished business. Rivers studied his friend's ravaged face. Your boy would be 11 now, probably tall like you. Your daughter would be 7, maybe missing some baby teeth. Don't. They need their father, Mason. The real one, not this ghost. Their father is dead. Mason stood, holstering his weapon. But his ghost will make sure they're never driven from their home again. That no family in this territory suffers what we suffered. And when the ghost is finally laid to rest. Mason looked at the setting sun, the same sun that had witnessed his last peaceful day. Then maybe Pete and I can share a drink in whatever comes after. Compare notes on who was the bigger fool. He walked to his horse, mounted, and rode away without looking back. Rivers remained at the ruins, saying a prayer for the living and the dead. The gold was never found. Whether it existed at all became another part of the legend. But for years afterward, when men spoke of taking what wasn't theirs through violence and intimidation, someone would mention Mason Kane, the man who lost everything and became vengeance itself. Justice by his own hand, they called it. Terrible, absolute, and final. 5 years had passed since the Willow Creek massacre. The territory had changed, grown civilized with the coming of the railroad and proper law enforcement. The wild days were ending, but in the forgotten corners of the desert, some ghosts still walked. Mason Kane sat by a dying fire in a nameless canyon, reading a letter worn soft from handling. Sarah's handwriting had always been precise, beautiful. My dearest Mason, I pray this letter finds you, though I know not where to send it. Thomas is 16 now, strong and kind like his father was. Emma plays piano and reads everything she can find. They ask about you less now, but I see you in their eyes every day. Robert says you send money. We don't need it, but I understand why you do it. I've forgiven you, my love, for leaving, for choosing vengeance over us. I understand now that you did it to protect us in your way. But Mason, it's time to come home. Whatever you've become, whatever you've done, you're still their father, still my husband. The war is over. Let the ghost rest and come back to us. All my love, Sarah. The letter was dated 3 years ago. Mason had never replied, never dared to stain their new life with his bloodied presence. But he'd kept watch from afar, ensuring their safety, removing threats before they materialized. You look tired, old friend. Mason didn't turn at Rivers' voice. Getting old, Samuel. Slower than I was. Time to quit, then. One more job. Mason folded the letter carefully. Word is Jake Thornton had a brother. Ben Thornton. He's gathered a gang, planning something big. Let the law handle it. The law doesn't know he's targeting Tucson, specifically a certain general store owned by one Robert Kane. Rivers sat beside him. How many men? 15, maybe 20. Young guns looking to make a reputation. You can't take 20 men, not anymore. No, Mason agreed, but I don't need to take them all, just need to stop them. They rode through the night, 2 aging warriors on one last mission. Mason had sent word ahead through Maria Santos's network, evacuate Robert's family, alert the town marshal. But he knew it wouldn't be enough. Ben Thornton wanted Kane blood, and he'd tear Tucson apart to get it. They caught up with Thornton's gang at Sulphur Springs, 30 miles from Tucson. The outlaws had made camp, confident in their numbers and firepower. Remember the plan, Mason whispered. Hit the horses first, scatter them, in the confusion. I know. Rivers checked his rifle. Mason, if this goes bad, tell Sarah I loved her. Every day, every moment, I loved her. They struck at dawn. Rivers' shots stampeded the horses, while Mason hit the ammunition wagon with dynamite. The explosion shattered the morning peace, sending outlaws scrambling for cover. It's Kane, someone shouted. It's the ghost! Ben Thornton emerged from his tent, younger than his brother, but with the same cruel eyes. Spread out! It's just 2 old men! The battle was fierce but brief. Mason and Rivers had experience and positioning, but the outlaws had numbers. As the sun climbed, both sides had taken casualties. Mason felt the bullet before he heard the shot. It punched through his side, spinning him to the ground. Another caught his shoulder as he tried to rise. Mason! Rivers fought to reach him, but there were too many guns between them. Ben Thornton stood over Mason, revolver aimed at his head. the great Mason Kane, you killed my brother. Your brother was a murderer, Mason gasped through the pain. So are you. Thornton cocked the hammer. Difference is, he died quick. You're going to suffer. A rifle cracked. Thornton staggered, looking down at the spreading red stain on his chest. Behind him, a young man lowered a smoking Winchester. Thomas? Mason's vision blurred, but he knew that stance, that determined jaw. Hello, Pa? Thomas Kane worked the rifle's lever, covering the remaining outlaws. Uncle Robert taught me to shoot. Said I might need it someday. The Tucson posse arrived moments later, led by Marshal Dixon and a dozen deputies. The surviving outlaws surrendered, suddenly outnumbered and leaderless. Mason Kane, Dixon said, looking down at the wounded legend. You're under arrest for... He stopped, seeing the extent of Mason's injuries. Get a doctor, now! No! Mason caught his son's hand. Too late for doctors. Pa, why? Thomas knelt beside him, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. Why didn't you come home? To keep you safe, to keep you from becoming... like me. Mason's breath came in short gasps. Your mother, is she... She's in Tucson. Uncle Robert sent me ahead with the posse when we got word. Thomas gripped his father's hand tighter. She never remarried, Pa. Said she already had a husband. Mason smiled through the pain. Stubborn woman. Tell her I kept my promise. No one will hurt our family again. Rivers appeared, supporting a wounded arm. Rest easy, brother. It's finished. Samuel. The letter. Rivers pulled the worn paper from Mason's coat, pressed it into Thomas's hands. Your mother's words. He read them every night. As the sun climbed toward noon, Mason Kane looked at his son. Now a man, strong and true. You're free now, Thomas. Both of you. Live without hate. Emma knelt beside them, tears streaming. We will, Papa. We'll live good lives. I promise. Mason's breathing grew shallow. In the distance, he could see Sarah waiting for him, bathed in golden light. I'm coming home, darling. With his children's hands in his, Mason Kane closed his eyes for the last time. The man who had become death itself, in pursuit of justice, finally found peace. Thomas stood slowly, Emma beside him. Rivers placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. Your father was the bravest man I ever knew. He gave everything for you. What do we do now? Emma asked, wiping her tears. Thomas looked at the ranch in the distance. Their ranch. We live, we rebuild, we honor them by being better than the violence that took them. As they carried Mason's body home, the desert wind whispered through the canyon, carrying away the echoes of gunfire and vengeance. The cycle was broken. 6 months had passed since the bloodbath at Devil's Canyon. The Kane Ranch, once a symbol of death and sorrow, bloomed with new life. Thomas worked the fields, while Emma tended the garden their mother had loved. Rivers, now sheriff of Willow Creek, visited often. On a quiet Sunday morning, Thomas stood at the hilltop cemetery, placing fresh wildflowers on 3 graves: Sarah, little Emma, and Mason Kane. The wooden crosses bore simple inscriptions, but the love they represented was eternal. Morning, Pa, Thomas said softly. The corn's coming in strong this year. Emma's been teaching at the schoolhouse. You'd be proud. She's got Ma's patience and your strength. The wind rustled through the desert sage as if in response. Emma joined him, carrying baby Sarah, named for their mother. She'd married the doctor's son, a good man who'd never known violence. Uncle Samuel says hello. He arrested the last of Blackwood's men yesterday. It's really over. Thomas nodded, adjusting his father's hat, now his. Sometimes I wonder if Pa found peace in the end. He found justice, Emma said. And he found his way back to us, even if just for a moment. That's more than most men get. As they walked back to the ranch, Thomas remembered his father's final words. They'd chosen to live without hate, to break the cycle. The land that had seen so much blood now nurtured life. That evening, as the sun set over the Arizona desert, Thomas sat on the porch with his own family. His wife, Maria, brought him coffee while their twin boys played in the yard. The ghosts of the past no longer haunted these lands. Rivers rode up, dismounting with the ease of a man at peace with himself. Beautiful evening, Thomas. That it is, Samuel. Join us? As they sat together, watching the children play where violence once reigned, they knew the true price of vengeance. It had cost them everything and given them a chance to build something better. Mason Kane had walked through hell to protect his family. In the end, his greatest victory wasn't in the men he killed, but in the legacy of love and resilience he left behind. The last sunset of Mason Kane had given way to a new dawn for his children. In the distance, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. Thomas tensed for a moment, old instincts stirring, but it was just a traveling merchant seeking shelter for the night. They welcomed him with open arms, for the days of fear were over. The Kane name, once synonymous with vengeance, now stood for hospitality, hard work, and hope. Mason's sacrifice had purchased not just revenge, but redemption. As night fell over the Arizona territory, the stars shone bright over a land finally at peace. The price of vengeance had been paid in full, and from its ashes a better world had grown. If you were in Mason Kane's boots, would you have chosen the path of vengeance or tried to seek justice through the law? What defines true justice in a lawless land? Share your thoughts below. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button.